Hello my friends, welcome back to Refit and Sail. My name's George Istid, the Solent Boat Butler. I refit and repair boats for a living. I run a business called the Solent Boat Butler, funnily enough. And in this video, I'm going to be working on, for a change, my own boat. This is an SJ320 that I bought fairly recently in a slightly sorry state, it has to be said. And through these videos, I'm bringing her back up to racing condition. In this video, we need to do something with this. So as I said, this is a SJ320 built by Sequest Yachts, designed by Stephen Jones, the legendary designer who actually lives just across the water there, but I'm yet to meet him. This boat is hull number 3. It is an early one, so this was built in '95. So they were, I think, to some extent still learning how to build these boats, but I've found very, very few problems with her. Mostly it's just been wear and tear items and a little bit of repairing and refitting where required. But I've got to do something with the rudder. When I picked this boat up, as I said, she was in a very, very sorry state. She hadn't been used for a number of years, and when I went to move the tiller, I couldn't, and it was completely jam solid. Now, I think that was partly due to the fact that the boat hadn't been used for quite some time. It is now moving, but it's incredibly stiff. Now, I'm not sure what's going on with the rudder bearings, and so it's time to find out. The plan is to get the rudder down and see what's going on. It could be that there's just lots of crustaceans and dirt and grime up in those bearings, or it could be the bearings have swollen. I'm not 100% sure. We're just going to have to wait and see. You will find out as I do. Now, without my face in the way, you can see that the rudder blade is actually in remarkably good condition for a boat that's been around for a few years. There's no real damage that I have seen. All the coatings have been removed, the anti-fouling and the epoxy primers that were on there, so it's all ready for recoating as long as the rudder stock itself is in decent condition. But we won't find that out until it is out. And there's a rather lovely Contessa in the background on my client's boat, so we've just reapplied copper coat to that. But let's have a quick look at the other side, and you can see a little bit of epoxy barrier still to remove once the rudder is off, but no damage at all. Here she is up on deck. Unfortunately, I've managed to cover her in dirty footprints. It's a light coloured gel coat in the cockpit, and you can see it's a dirty boatyard, so I've been getting dirty footprints all over the place. Tiller steered, and that's the first thing we need to look at. I need to remove the tiller. Here is the tiller. It is still quite stiff to move. I've got a nasty feeling that the bottom bearing may have clamped itself around the rudder stock, and it's the whole bearing that's turning in the rudder tube. So that's why I'm trying not to do too much of this, because I don't want to damage the rudder tube. But again, I won't know until I get it off. Removing this tiller right out of shot, it's really difficult to see probably for you, but there are some bolts. There's a kind of a tiller hood, this stainless steel part here, which attaches the wooden tiller to a block, which I presume is probably made out of bronze or stainless or something like that. So I'm just going to unbolt this and then see how I take that block off. I'm going to put some wooden blocks under the rudder should it just want to fall out. I think that's highly unlikely, and then we will take it from there. There is the fixing bolt. Oh, and there is the tiller. That is the, what I assume is a bronze block that is clamped around the top of the rudder stock, so you can just about see the rudder stock there. There's a gap there. There isn't a gap at the back, so that is just a clamp on fitting, I guess. That probably needs a new nylock on it. Shouldn't really use or reuse nylocks multiple times, because the little nylon bit in the end that stops them from undoing, well, it gets worn out. So ideally you use them once. You can get away with 2 or 3 times if I'm honest, but if you've wound it up and down a really long thread, obviously that is winding off the nylon that's inside the nut. So you do need to replace nylocks periodically. Right, I'm going to, in the slot, just gently bump the end of a flat blade screwdriver, large one, into the bit that just needs to open up just a fraction so that I can lift the block off. Pop that in there, and we'll see. Yes, it's now loose. You can't see it from where you're looking, but if I get that wedged in there, it is wiggleable now. Right, I can see me having to do a lot of wiggling and maybe some swearing, so I'm going to turn the camera off. I have decided to remove the piece of the boat. I'm not quite sure what you call it. It's the mounting bracket for the main sheet. So that bolts in there just because it was going to make access easier. I was trying to avoid taking things apart that I don't need to take apart, but I suspect I'm going to want to have it off to see what's going on with these bearings. And that's allowed me to remove the bolt that was going through there. And now I suspect, well, I'm hoping, if I bump this in here a bit, I'm hopeful. Oh, there we go. Right, that is a big step forward. And as it turns out, that bolt was doing something. There is a little recess machined in there. So, okay, there we go. This did need to come off. It wasn't just going to slide off with the bolt in there. So this is all part of a learning process, because guess what? All boats are slightly different. There are some common themes, but I'm going to go back down below and have another go. Exciting. Well, exciting for me, because I'm a bit sad like this. And I'm guessing if you're watching this, you might be a little bit sad like me when it comes to doing boat jobs. Right, stop talking, do more doing. I'm going to start by giving it a wiggle, just to see what happens. And it is not coming, which is not that much of a surprise, but I don't know if it's come down a little bit. It may have done. It's hard to tell. Yeah, I think, yeah, there we go. It is coming. Oh, she's coming. Come on, baby. Oh. It is coming slowly. Come on. Come on. Come on. Well, there is progress. As you can see, it is coming down slowly, but I'm using kind of double wedges and increasing numbers of blocks of wood to force it down. The annoying thing is it turns reasonably freely. It just doesn't want to come down. It's very, very tight. I think in the top bearing, that or the shaft is kind of dirty and grubby, and I'm just pulling dirt through a bearing, and the bearing is spinning, but it's catching when I try and pull it out of the bearing. As you hopefully just saw, the rudder is out. It put up a hell of a fight, and interestingly, up in here, I was expecting a plain bearing. There's a roller bearing, which is nice. You can see there is a roller bearing, and there's also quite a lot of crud that needs cleaning out, and I suspect that's what the problem was. It was just full of dirt, so I'm going to clean everything and shove the rudder back up the hole and hope that the bearing doesn't actually need to be replaced. And there is the rudder, currently upside down, and quite a lot of water came out of it initially when I turned it upside down. It's now just dripping gently, And you can see there's a little bit of corrosion just around the top here, but I suspect if I give that a clean up with a bit of wet and dry, it won't be too bad, and it'll be a perfectly serviceable rudder for a few years yet. Now, because I don't plan anything when I'm filming these videos, unfortunately, I am a professional boat builder, not a professional videographer or YouTubist. But I think I got the rudder out, but I hadn't removed anything up the top here. That's the tiller block, but I hadn't removed these screws. And if I just angle you down, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about. Did I say I was a professional videographer? No, I said I wasn't. There we go. Let's angle this camera, and down here there's like a thrust washer, thrust bearing, and there's a whole bunch of screws that go through an aluminium plate at the top here, and it took a little bit of persuasion to get these out. Some of the screws just unscrewed, some of them took a bit of swearing, but they all came out eventually, and this is what retains the top bearing, which is just a plain bearing. Now, I don't think there's actually a lot of wear in this, but because I need to sort out the bottom bearing and this needs to come out, I might as well make a new one for it. And I'm going to knock this out. It's just an interference fit. I'm going to knock this out using a slide hammer, but I'm going to use the slide hammer in reverse. I have a slide hammer which I had made for removing cutlass bearings on Contessa 32s, but it has a nice big weight on it, and so I'm going to drop that down, attach the weight underneath, pull it back up, and then hopefully bump this bearing out, which will hopefully allow me to reach down the tube and see if I can locate and remove a little snap ring that fits into a recess that's machined into this aluminium tube, which retains the lower bearing, which is a cassette of roller bearings, which I think have swollen, but we can't absolutely confirm that until we get it out and we measure everything. I say we, I have a very friendly and very, very good machinist friend who is going to be making up the new bearings if I need them. There we go. BEA, beautiful. Unfortunately, I can get my arm in there. It's a bit of a tight fit, but I'm desperately worried about getting my arm stuck, and I'm putting it in as far as I can dare. Feels like I'm putting my hand up a cow. Just about, with the very tip of my finger, touch the slip ring. Oh. Well, I think what I'm going to have to do is stick a screwdriver up from underneath and see if I can knock it out from underneath, and then I can push the whole lot up, hopefully, and out of the hole. Another couple of days have passed, and I just wanted to update you on what's going on down here, because it's been very, very frustrating, and there's been a lot of head scratching, and I have had to go away and take some advice. Essentially, I have removed that snap ring that I spoke about earlier, managed to get it out from the top, but I still can't get the roller bearing up and out of the tube, because the ID of the tube above where the bearing sits is smaller than the cage which holds the roller bearing, so it won't come out from the top, and that led to some head scratching because I'm looking at the bottom and I can't see it, how it comes out at the bottom. I've been all over the internet trying to find what steering system this is. I assumed it was a Jeffer system, but I'm not sure that it is now that, or it's a very early Jeffer system. So I went off and spoke to my good friend Robin, who has done lots of work on different steering systems. He came and had a look and he went, yeah, I've not seen one of those, George. That's really odd. Maybe the tube unscrews. It is very, very slightly loose at the top here because, you know, things are flexible. Doesn't appear to unscrew. So the only solution we can find at the moment, if we need to replace those bottom bearings, is to remove the tube. At which point we should be able to get to the bottom of the tube and pull that cage out, because we won't be having the problem of the hull laminate being there, because the hull laminate, the hole in the hull is just about the right size, or just slightly larger than the rudder stock, and there isn't any removable piece there like you would get on a more modern Jeffer system to allow you to pull the bearing out. But we have one thing that we're going to try before we start cutting away the glasswork which holds the tube in place. And that is to see if we can use some descaler, which I've got over here. It's a slightly dirty bottle because it's been in my workshop for a while. It's red lime descaler that is used in engines, marine engines, to remove scale, lime scale, and that sort of thing. And we have a theory. The bearings here are tight. They're not loose, which is what you'd normally get. They're tight, which made me think that they've swollen. But there is a chance that despite my washing out, there's still a whole load of lime scale down there that has closed in the walls of the tube. It's possibly on the rollers as well, and that is just enough to stop this from turning freely and allow me to get the rudder stock in and out fairly easily. I mean, it shouldn't be loose, it should be tight, but not so tight that I had to, you know, obviously remove the rudder with a lot of swearing and what have you. So I have taped up the outside of the hole down here with some wide PVC tape. I'm going to mix up some of this at a 50-50% ratio. I was worried about using this with aluminium because aluminium and acidic products generally aren't a great idea, but the manufacturer's instructions do say it's safe for aluminium if it's watered down to a 50-50 mix. So I'm going to chuck that down the hole. I'm using a flask of hot water to aid its process of descaling this. I'm going to pop it in now. It's the start of the day, it's 8 o'clock, and leave it for 6 hours, something like that, and then I'll flush that out with some fresh water. My friend Robin is going to make me a mandrel, is going to make me a go gauge effectively, which is exactly the same size as my rudder stock on his lathe, so that I can slide that up and see if it then fits, having descaled it. If that doesn't work, then we're into taking the tube out, which I really, really don't want to do. I just want to cover the bearings. And hope that the tape holds and it doesn't all run out the bottom of the boat. Right, that has just covered the bearings, I think. So I'm going to go do some paid work and leave that to fizz. If it does fizz, that means it's doing something. Well folks, it is a very beautiful Saturday morning here on the River Hamble, and in my hand I have a very cold piece of metal. This has been turned up by my very good friend Robin, who is an excellent machinist. Now it has to be said, I've had a good look up in here, so the acid did its job. It did bubble a little bit, which is a good sign, and I have given it a very, very thorough wash out with fresh water. So the hose has been up there, it's been down from the top. I didn't actually think they looked that dirty when I was looking at them before, but they do look cleaner, and this has been made a thou over the size of my rudder stock. Now I've got to be honest, I have already tried this, but let me show you what happens now when I pop this up. Just getting into the bearings, and oh, when I did this earlier it was slightly easier, but it goes in there now. So that is absolutely perfect, I would say. So it was just scale. Problem solved. I'm absolutely over the moon with that. I can pull this in and pull it out quite easily, especially if I give it a wiggle. And so given that this is, as I said, slightly oversized, I think when the rudder goes up there it's going to be absolutely perfect. I'm really over the moon. I don't have to take the rudder tube out. With the bottom bearing sorted, I'm pretty happy, but I am going to take this, which is the top bearing. It's just a plain bearing made out of acetal, I would imagine. I'm going to take that off to the workshop and pop it onto the top of the rudder stock, because I haven't actually checked to see how loose or tight it is. If I need to get it replaced, I can do that. What I may even do is just have this center hole overboard and then have a new bearing put in to the existing bearing just to close it up to exactly the right size. But if this is okay, it can go straight back into the boat. And whilst I'm here, I thought I would share with you what's going on the bottom. I know it's not the subject of this video, but people have been asking what I'm doing about anti-fouling, because I haven't covered that on the show. And as you can see, it's almost all done. The bottom has been epoxy coated, so I use a product called High Protect from Hempel on the bottom as a new anti-osmosis water barrier coating. On top of that there's a primer, and this is a hard racing anti-foul. And as you can see, because I'm a fussy bugger, I've got some temporary supports put in where the cradle pads were so that I can scrape under the cradle pads and then paint them in exactly the same way. So the bottom, when she goes in the water, will be perfect. Well folks, now that I know the bearings are all going to be good here, I need to start thinking about the rudder. When I took it off, I turned it upside down. I could hear water sloshing around and a ton of water fell out of it. Once that had all drained out, I turned it back up the right way and I could still hear water sloshing around, so it was obviously trapped. Drilled a couple of holes in the bottom and then that made a nice spurt of black water come out of the rudder, and for the last 2, maybe 3 weeks the rudder has been sat in my workshop slowly drying out. I've got a dehumidifier on in here and a bit of warmth next to it, and I think it is semi-dry inside. There's no way to completely dry it inside without splitting the rudder open, which I'm not going to do because it's structurally it's absolutely fine. It just had water in it, and it's got water in it because there is a lot of damage, or there's a lot of holes at the top of the rudder where it wasn't particularly well sealed up, probably when the boat was built. Here's a close-up of the top of the rudder, and well, this all feels fairly hollow and it all kind of moves. The foam inside feels pretty dry, but this is basically just a skim of filler that is all over the top here, but there's a big crack down there, and yeah, I mean, it's just, it all needs to come off and that needs to be resealed. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is get this on the bench and use an oscillating saw and cut away this top filler and down into the foam and see what I find. Just a quick one to remind you that you can support the show in one of 3 different ways. Liking and subscribing does make a massive difference to the growth of this channel, and I really appreciate it when people do that. But there is also a link down in the description where you can buy me a beer. It's a PayPal link, and all the funds that I do collect from that do go directly to supporting Refit and Sale, this project, and keeping the lights on here on the channel. So if you do donate, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. I've basically cleared the top, I don't know, 2.5 inches, finger length of dirty old foam, and there's lots of basically polyester filler bog in the top here as well, which I'm grinding away because when I refill this I want to be able to glue the 2 sides of the rudder blade together, and I can't do that without getting a really good bond on the inside, so I'm just grinding this back now to basically the fiberglass that this was laid up with. Once it's nice and clean, I'll flip it over, do the other side, and give it a good clean. Well, I think I've done all the cleaning and grinding that I'm going to do in here. I've gone down about that far. You should hopefully be seeing a close-up now. Next job, having cleaned it with acetone, and I've set it up against the bench so that the top of this is reasonably level, is to fill it full of new foam. Now, the foam that was in here would have been a foaming polyurethane that was used at the time, because at the time that was the best thing available. But you can now get foaming epoxies, which are super hard. They're kind of like a structural element within a rudder when it's used, and it will glue the 2 sides of this together, and it's a far better option. It is simply one of them to one of them. This stuff is made by Sycamin. It's PB 250 Sycamin epoxy systems. I've got this left over from another project, fortunately, where I didn't use all of the material that I bought. My recollection is it doubles or triples in size, but certainly no more than that. It doesn't go crazy. So I'm going to mix up a batch, chuck it in there, and then with some heating on in here, leave it to cure overnight, and come back and see what it looks like tomorrow. Well, all the foaming epoxy is in. I might have slightly overdone it at the front here because it's just about to come over the top. I thought I got it about right, but it is still growing very slightly. So what I'm going to do to save myself a messy cleanup is I'm going to run some masking tape around the top to effectively make a higher thing for it to come up and over. And then if it does continue to grow, all I can do is cut that epoxy off after it has set. So I'm just going to run this around, and hopefully this will kind of contain the epoxy a little bit. Well, folks, we are back in the room. It is Saturday morning. It is 4 days to Christmas. I haven't been here for a while to look at this. Well, I have been in to look at it, but I've been busy on paid work and fitting electronics to Furiosa. But that's all done. It's now time to look at this. And as you can see, the foaming epoxy got a little bit excited and came out the top slightly, but that is good. That's far better than me having to put more foam in there. So I've brought you in a little bit closer so you can see what's going on here. I have my Bosch multi-tool. I've had this thing absolutely years. It just refuses to die, which is excellent. And it's just like a fairly blunt, to be honest with you, cutting blade on the end there. And I'm going to try and go in sideways to chop off the excess foam. Need to find a home for all the stuff that's on the floor around me. Success! Amazing stuff. That looks pretty good to me. Oh, getting this off is not going to be as easy though. The stuff around the... oh no, actually that isn't too bad. It hasn't stuck that readily to the aluminium, fortunately. It's coming off quite easily. That's often the way bonding anything to metal is a hard thing to do, particularly if the metal hasn't been prepared in any way for being bonded to, and there was probably some contaminants on this which has done me a favour, and it hasn't stuck particularly well, so I can chip it off quite easily. So that is good news. Right, let's see. Look at that. Beautiful. Before I have a tidy up, I thought I'd set you up a little bit higher so you can see the top of this is all the foam, and as I said, fortunately I think this foam that's on here seems to chip off fairly readily, so I will do that and clearing it all off. Now the question is what I'm going to do over the top here. I've had various different thoughts about that, and when I started taking the rudder apart, I'm not sure if it had a skim of glass over the top of here or not. I suspect it did, a very, very thin one, but it was mostly kind of filler, kind of bog material in there. So what my intention is, I think, is to take off a little bit of this foam. So I'm going to go down maybe 3 to 5 mil so that it's below the top of this level here, the top of the rudder blade. I'm then going to put a skim of filler all the way in there, and I'm going to lay up some glass over the top. However, the whole point of having glass there is to some extent to tie the two sides together, and also just to give it a bit more kind of penetration resistance if a rope or something got caught up in here between the hull and the rudder stock. It gives a bit of abrasion resistance and a bit more strength to it. To do that, I need to bond glass, and obviously I want to bond it to the edge of here, which is not going to be very successful because this laminate is, I'm going to say, 3 to 4 mil thick at best. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to grind down just along the edge here and put in a fillet of thickened resin, which is going to have a flush top to it. And once that's cured, I'm going to bond the glass over the top of that to the thickened resin. Right, I'm going to draw you a picture so you can see what I'm thinking. If you imagine you can see inside the rudder, well, that is the rudder stock, and there are the two side skins of the rudder blade. At the moment, there's a load of foam in here all the way up to the top. What I'm thinking is I'm going to have the foam, so it goes along here, just below the surface of this, just below the top level of this, and then I'm just going to grind back a little bit here. So this is all foam. Oops, sorry. This is all foam here, and then I'm going to fill this bit here, and then I'm going to lay up a very, very thin, maybe just 1 or 2 layers of combi mat over the top of that. So the combi mat is going to be bonding to the epoxy filler that I'm going to put in here and the epoxy that's here, and because I'm taking that down the side, that will hopefully have a reasonably good bond onto the glass. Well, we are back in the clean room, and as you can see, this has all been prepared. I have removed the foam just a little bit, so it's a bit variable, but probably, you know, 5 to 7 mil below the surface level of the skin. So I'm going to mix up some resin, thicken it, and get it into these edges, and then just generally get it all over. So that I don't get it on the stock, I'm going to rewind a bit of masking tape around that just to protect it, and I can whip that off afterwards. I'll probably put a bit of masking tape around the edge here. Now, my question is, what resin am I going to be using? There are a few options. So the skin is made out of polyester. That's what this would have been made out of originally. That is foaming epoxy, and this is obviously aluminium. So we've got 3 different materials here that we want to kind of tie in. One option is to use epoxy, but that is polyester, but we know epoxy will stick to polyester very readily, so that would be a very good option. The other option is using polyester resin, which I thicken, but that's not great because it's not going to stick fantastically well to this foaming epoxy. It may not stick particularly well to the aluminium. So what I'm actually going to use is a hybrid option, which is vinyl ester. Vinyl ester is very similar to polyester, but it has many of the properties of epoxy. It's also a fair bit cheaper than using epoxy, and it's also a lot quicker to use because you put a catalyst in it like you do normal polyester, and it cures far more quickly. So I'm going to use vinyl ester. It will bond well to that, it will bond well to the polyester, and it should hopefully bond reasonably well to the aluminium stock as well. And there we go, that's got some material all in there. It's not beautiful, it's not perfectly flat, but we're just gap filling and giving some material here that I can bond some glass to, so I think that is going to be plenty good enough. I'm going to go cut some glass, grab some lunch, because I'm like a baby, I need to be fed fairly regularly, otherwise I get very grumpy, and then we can lay up some glass over the top of that this afternoon, hopefully, and we are getting there on the rudder rebuild. Whilst I think of it, if you are enjoying this sort of content, please do remember to give me a thumbs up down below. It makes a massive difference to the growth of my channel. And if you subscribe and hit the bell icon, that will make sure that you don't miss any future episodes of Refit and Sail. Thanks very much. Well, folks, we are back. Lunch has been eaten, so I'm a happy boy. And this has cured enough that I can lay out some glass on it. I'm going to give this a very quick wipe over with some 80 grit just to knock off any high spots, and off camera I have just cut up 2 of those and 2 of those. So this is combi mat, so it is CSM on that side, it is woven glass on that side. In America land I believe you call it 1708, for a reason I absolutely cannot fathom, but if you know the answer to that, let me know in the comments. I'll be very interested. Yeah, that's all that needs to be done really. I'm going to mix up some more of that vinyl ester resin, catalyze it, put a little bit on the surface first because it will fill any little holes and what have you in there, because it's not perfect but it's good enough. Lay up the glass and leave it to cure. What's quite nice about getting to this before it is completely cured is, whilst it's just about sandable, it's a little bit gummy, but by putting the next layer on using the same resin as this was made from, when it all cures, it will cure together and there'll be a bit of a chemical bond between this sort of filling material and the glass layer as well. Right, I'll give that a wipe off camera and get some resin out off camera, and then we can get it all done. Lovely. Having looked at this, I have actually mixed up some catalysed resin and put some more of the filler in it because there were a few holes, so I'm just going to fill those holes up a little bit before I put the glass on top. But this is such a thin skim of filler, I can put the glass straight on top of it. I'm not worried about that. It was just a bit rougher than I was really 100% happy with, so this very thin skim is filling up those little voids. We don't want voids, do we? And then let's get that off, and we can stick the glass on afterwards. Normally I would wet that with resin, but it's kind of got filler on it, so that's going to make it a bit tricky. This does overlap the edges slightly on purpose because I can trim that off easily once it's on. And to wet this out, I'm simply, can't see what I've done with my brush. I was about to say I'm simply going to brush and wet this out with a brush. Ah, there it is, hiding in plain sight. Well, here's a close-up of how this looks now. So 2 layers of glass in, and I've taken the tape off so that doesn't get stuck on. I've learnt that lesson the hard way, and this is as far as I can get it today, I think, because I want this to completely cure before I do anything with it, before I trim the glass around the edges. I'm calling that good for now. Well folks, it's the next day and I am back in the cleaner part of the workshop, and as you can see here I have trimmed the excess glass that was on the top of the rudder. So I just came in with a belt sander and just buzzed off the excess, and then came in with just like a normal DA sander to take the rest off, so this is all nice and flush. Buzzed over the top as well, and it's actually a really good finish on there. It doesn't need any filling and fairing. That is all ready to go. But what does need a fill are some little bits of damage that are kind of along the trailing edge here. So I'm going to mix up some 2-part epoxy filler, squeeze that in all the holes. I'm going to do this side, and then I'm going to flip it over and do the other side as well. The holes that I drilled in the bottom to let the water out that were in, I'm just going to fill up again with epoxy filler, and it's as dry as it's going to get inside without splitting it open. I'm not going to get it any drier, so I'm just going to call it done. I have run a countersink tool down into those holes to have a nice big chamfer, so there's a nice bit of surface area for the epoxy filler to attach itself to. Everything's been wiped down with acetone, so all I need to do now is mix up some epoxy filler, put it on and go home, because it is time to start celebrating Christmas. I've got lots of wrapping to do. It is Christmas Eve tomorrow, so it's Eve. Is that right? I think that's right. Anyway, I need to stop playing with boats and spend some time with my family very, very soon. that's enough of that. It's time for Christmas. Ta-ta! Well folks, Santa has been and gone. I've got a cold, so I apologise if I sound a bit bunged up. This got a second coat of filler on the opposite side yesterday, and I left some heating on there in here, so this is kind of ready to sand, which is the final step, hopefully, before I can get some epoxy barrier coats on this. I'm going to be using the same stuff that I used on the rest of the hull of the boat, which is Hempel High Protect, and a couple of coats of that all over, as long as I don't need to do any more filling. I am reasonably hopeful that I can get that done today, because I'm keen to get the rudder back on the boat. But first, I'm going to take it outside, give it a quick buzz over with a sander, and find out if I have done enough filling. Well, having had a sand, this is looking pretty decent now, and in fact, I've brought it round to my new clean room because I've got enough height here to hang it up, which I don't have in my old one. So the sanding of this took no time at all, really. It's all looking pretty nice, and it's ready for the epoxy barrier coating. Now, as you can see, this clean room is definitely work in progress. It's part of my new workshop facility that I am currently building, but I'm having to do it around real paid work and making these videos, so it's slightly slow progress. But Tom, if you're watching, you're a legend for helping me build it. Thank you very much. Anyway, time to mix up some High Protect and get this coated, and then I'm going to call it lunchtime. The light isn't particularly good for filming in here, but here is the first coat of High Protect on, and it's looking pretty decent. I'm going to put a second and possibly a third coat on here, and then we can call this rudder done and chuck it back in the boat. There are two things I need to do before fitting the rudder, sliding it back up the hole, and the first is to refit the top bearing. So this was overboard, this nylon bearing as it turns out, and it has had an acetal or Delrin bearing put into the old bearing, so it's tightened that up nicely, so it is a lovely snug fit at the top of the rudder stock. So that just needs popping back in there. But the other thing that I want to do is I need to refit this top plate here, which secures the top of the rudder tube in place. It stops it from wobbling around, and the fixings that go through this, the M6 fixings, go into an aluminium plate, a circular plate, which is just below the deck here, and that was not easy to remove. So I'm going to run a thread cutting tap into all of those holes just to clean them all up, and then I've got some new fixings to put that all back together again, and I'm going to put some anti-corrosion paste on all of those fixings when they go in, when it goes together. In case you're wondering, yes, it is still a bit tight, which is very frustrating, because the go gauge that I had made, which was theoretically the same size as this, was a nice snug fit and went in with a little bit of twiddling. But this is going in. I've got the tip in, but I'm struggling to push the rest of the shaft in. There's a joke there, but I won't go there. So I'm just going to keep wriggling for a bit. It's not easy on my own, if I'm honest, so I'm going to have a bit more of a wriggle and see how far I get. But in reality, what I'm probably going to do is wait for tomorrow, when I can grab a second pair of hands, so one person can wiggle and one person can push, and hopefully we can lift it up into the boat with a little bit of wriggling. Turns beautifully in the bearing, virtually no friction at all. It turns really nicely, but it's just snug getting pushed up through those roller bearings, which is annoying, but there we go. Well, here we are, and the rudder is in the boat, and I have just watched Charlie Dalin finish the Vendée Globe live over in Les Sables d'Olonne on the other side of the channel, so very, very well done to him. On the rudder, this was a right faff to get in, if I'm honest. The bottom bearing is snug, shall we say. The rudder stock will go up, but it has to be aligned absolutely dead straight for it to go up there. Initially, with some help even, I couldn't get it up there, so we were using a bit of leverage. We used a plank of wood and a block of wood underneath it to try and lever the thing up, just to give us a bit more pressure to shove it up the hole. But unfortunately, because of the shape of the rudder, that then pushed it out of true, and of course it would then catch, and we had a devil of a job getting it up there. In the end, we decided that it had to be manhandled in there, and between the two of us, with all our strength and a bit of lubricant on the rudder stock, we managed to physically, both of us, push it, wiggle it, and just jiggle it around and push it up into the boat without causing any damage to anything in the bearings or the rudder stock, and it went in. The top has all been done up, so the rudder can't fall out now, so it is basically all done, and I can turn the rudder with my little pinky finger should I wish to. It is beautifully smooth, and everything is chef kiss perfect, so really pleased with that. Thank you very, very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's a slightly longer one than I had planned. If you could give me a thumbs up, a like down below, and subscribe to the channel, it does make a massive difference to the growth of this channel. And a very, very, very big thank you to those of you that use the link down in the description, PayPal link, where you can buy me a beer, because it genuinely does help keep the lights on here at Refit and Sail. Thank you very, very much. Stay tuned, there is more boat works to come. I've got to do the sail drive diaphragm, which is just out of shot over there. That has to be done before I put the boat in the water, and there's a few other jobs and bits and pieces before it goes in the water, and then it's going to be splash day, and then the works will continue, but hopefully with a bit of sailing as well. Thanks again, see you next time. Bye for now.